Picture this. D-Day has just happened. The greatest invasion in history is underway. American forces are pouring into Europe, armed with the most advanced weapons the world has ever seen. Radar-guided artillery. Proximity fuses that turn anti-aircraft shells into deadly shrapnel clouds. And in a few months, the most terrifying weapon ever built will be dropped on Japan. Yet the man leading the charge, the general who would become a legend for smashing through enemy lines like a freight train, is carrying something that belongs in a museum. A single-action revolver from 1873. 6 shots. No magazine. No slide. Just a cylinder that turns by hand and a hammer you have to thumb back every single time. While every other officer in the United States Army is carrying the Colt M1911, the pistol that proved itself in 2 world wars, George S. Patton is walking around with what looks like Wyatt Earp sidearm. And he's not doing it for the cameras. He's doing it because he believes, deep in his bones, that this old gun will keep him alive when the modern one won't. This is the story of why the most famous American general of the 20th century refused to carry the most famous American pistol of the 20th century. And once you understand why, you'll never look at personal weapons the same way again. To understand Patton's choice, you first have to understand the world that shaped him. George Smith Patton Jr. was born in 1885 in Southern California, but his blood ran Confederate gray. His grandfather died charging at the head of his regiment at Cedar Creek. His great-uncle fell at Gettysburg. War wasn't something he read about in books. It was the ghost that sat at the family dinner table every night. When he entered West Point in 1904, the United States Army still believed the horse was the king of the battlefield. Tanks were science fiction. Airplanes were toys. And the cavalry officer's best friend was still the revolver that had tamed the American West. The Colt single-action army. The gun that won the West. The same revolver that rode with Custer, that Wyatt Earp carried into the OK Corral, that Bat Masterson used to keep order in Dodge City. To young George Patton, that revolver wasn't just a weapon. It was a bloodline. In 1912, at the age of 26, Lieutenant Patton traveled to Stockholm to represent the United States in the modern pentathlon at the Olympic Games. 5 brutal events designed to test exactly what a soldier would need to survive behind enemy lines. Shooting, fencing, swimming, horseback riding, and cross-country running. He finished 5th overall, the best non-Swedish athlete in the competition. But it was the shooting event that became legend. The judges ruled that Patton had missed the target completely with one of his shots. Patton calmly told them he had not missed. He had put the bullet through the exact same hole as a previous shot. The judges laughed. History, however, would side with Patton. The man could shoot. After the Olympics, he didn't go home. He went to Saumur, France, the spiritual home of European cavalry warfare. There he trained under the greatest swordmasters in the world, learning the devastating straight-thrust techniques that had broken armies at Waterloo and Austerlitz. When he returned to America, he did something no one expected. He told the United States Army their cavalry saber was wrong. The curved blade they had used since the Civil War was designed for slashing from horseback. Patton argued it was inferior to the straight French thrusting sword. He wrote a detailed report, and in 1913 the Army listened. They adopted the Model 1913 cavalry saber, the Patton saber, a straight-bladed weapon built for killing, not show. He was named Master of the Sword at the Mounted Service School in Fort Riley, Kansas, the first American officer ever to hold the title. This was the man who would later choose his sidearm. A man who had redesigned the Army's edged weapon. A man who had competed at the Olympics in shooting. A man who understood that in the chaos of battle, your weapons are not tools. They are extensions of your will. And when the Army issued him the brand new M1911 semi-automatic pistol, he looked at it the way a master horseman looks at a machine that requires 2 hands to operate. Because that's what a cavalry officer is. 1 hand on the reins. 1 hand free to fight. The Colt single-action army was built for exactly that life. Thumb the hammer. Squeeze the trigger. Thumb the hammer again. Every motion deliberate. Every motion possible with one hand while your horse is running at a full gallop through smoke and bullets. The M1911? Different story. To chamber a round, you rack the slide. 2 hands. To clear a jam, you tap, rack, bang. 2 hands. To reload, you drop the magazine, insert a new one, release the slide. 2 hands. Patton ran the numbers in his head, the way only a man who had trained to fight from the back of a charging horse could. And the math didn't add up. Then came the night in 1915 that changed everything. Patton was on border patrol in Texas, chasing Pancho Villa's raiders. One evening he was in a saloon, wearing the standard-issue M1911 tucked into his belt like the regulations said. No holster. Just the gun. The pistol went off by itself. The bullet hit the floor. No one was hurt. But for a man who had competed at the Olympics in shooting, who had spent years mastering weapons, the humiliation burned like acid. He never carried the M1911 again. Instead, he ordered a brand new Colt single-action army from a gunsmith in El Paso, chambered in .45 long Colt, with beautiful ivory grips. And from that moment forward, George S. Patton would carry a revolver into every war he ever fought. Because he had learned something the Army's weapons designers had forgotten. In the moment when your life is on the line, when your horse is rearing, when the enemy is 10 feet away, when your other hand is busy staying alive, you don't need more bullets. You need certainty. And certainty, to George Patton, came in the form of 6 rounds that would fire every single time, no matter what. No magazines to fail. No springs to weaken. No slides to jam. Just steel, gunpowder, and a man who refused to bet his life on anything less than absolute reliability. That decision would follow him into the deserts of Mexico, the trenches of France, and eventually the battlefields of World War II. And it would save his life more than once. But that's a story for the next chapter. Because what happened when this old-fashioned revolver met the real world of 20th century combat is even more surprising than why he chose it in the first place. Now imagine the year is 1916. The Mexican border is burning. Pancho Villa has just raided Columbus, New Mexico, killing American civilians and soldiers in their sleep. The United States responds with a punitive expedition, sending thousands of troops deep into Mexico under General John J. Pershing to hunt down Villa and bring him back, dead or alive. Lieutenant George Patton is 29 years old, serving on Pershing's staff, mostly doing paperwork and running errands. But he is burning to get into the fight. One day, intelligence comes in. One of Villa's top lieutenants, General Julio Cardenas, is hiding at a ranch called San Miguelito, not far from the American camp. Patton sees his chance. He asks Pershing for permission to lead a small motorized raid, 3 Dodge touring cars loaded with 10 men, machine guns, and rifles. Pershing, perhaps amused by the young officer's audacity, says yes. What happens next becomes one of the strangest gunfights of the early 20th century. The 3 cars roll up to the ranch at dawn. Patton's men surround the place. Suddenly, 3 Mexican riders burst out of the gate on horseback, charging straight at the Americans. Patton leaps out of his car, draws his ivory-handled Colt single-action army, and opens fire. 5 shots. 5 hits. All 3 riders go down. One of them is General Cardenas. Patton walks over to the fallen general, confirms the kill, and takes Cardenas's silver-tipped saddle and spurs as trophies. He keeps them on display for the rest of his life. The newspapers explode with the story, Pershing's bandit killer. Overnight, Patton becomes a national figure, the American officer who rode into Mexico in automobiles and shot it out like it was 1880. And in that single firefight, the revolver he had chosen after the humiliating saloon incident proved itself in blood. No jam. No magazine failure. No slide to rack under pressure. Just point, thumb the hammer, pull the trigger, 5 times in rapid succession while moving, and 5 men dead. The old gun from 1873 had just won again. From that day forward, Patton never seriously questioned his choice. When America entered the First World War in 1917, Patton went to France as the first officer to command American tanks in combat. He was wounded leading his tanks at St. Mihiel in 1918, shot through the leg while standing exposed on top of his tank, directing fire. Even then, the ivory-handled revolver stayed on his hip. Between the wars, while the rest of the army embraced the M1911 as the standard sidearm, Patton quietly refined his personal arsenal. By the time World War II began, his everyday carry was still the Colt single-action army, now customized with ivory grips engraved with his initials and general stars. But he added something new. On his left hip, he carried a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum registered Magnum, bought directly from the factory in 1935. This was no showpiece. This was his killing gun. The .357 Magnum cartridge was revolutionary at the time. Nearly double the muzzle energy of the .45 long Colt, capable of punching through car doors and light armor. Patton understood that in modern war, threats could come from armored vehicles, low-flying aircraft, or desperate close-in fights. If the Colt was his symbol of tradition and reliability, the Smith & Wesson was his answer to serious, life-threatening problems. And he didn't stop there. He also carried backup guns, a small Remington Model 51 in .380 ACP, a Colt Pocket Hammerless .380, and a Colt Detective Special .38 Special Revolver. Wait, semi-automatics? Yes. Patton was never dogmatic. He explained it clearly to those close to him. Big revolvers were best for the primary fighting weapon because nothing beats mechanical certainty. But for deep concealment, for true backup pieces carried in pockets or under uniforms, the small semi-autos were actually more practical than equivalent small revolvers of the era. It was a layered system, belt and suspenders. The guns you bet your life on were revolvers. The guns you carried just in case could be whatever worked best in that role. This thinking was decades ahead of its time. Today, elite special operations units around the world follow almost exactly the same philosophy. Standardize what must be standardized for logistics, but allow individual operators enormous freedom to choose the personal weapons that match their training, experience, and confidence. Patton believed this in 1915. He understood that no bureaucrat in Washington could possibly know better than the man at the sharp end what would keep him alive when everything else failed. And he used the freedom that general officers had in World War II to build exactly the armament system he wanted. In North Africa in 1942, when German planes strafed his headquarters, most officers dove for cover. Patton stood up, drew both revolvers, and opened fire on the low-flying aircraft, emptying both guns into the sky. His men watched in awe. They didn't see a crazy old man shooting at planes with antique pistols. They saw their general refusing to cower, refusing to hide, refusing to let fear win. That image burned into every soldier under his command. Later, in Sicily, France, and across Germany, the sight of those ivory-handled revolvers became a beacon. When communications broke down, when artillery was falling short, when the line was crumbling, soldiers could look across the battlefield and see the polished helmet, the gleaming boots, the riding crop, and those unmistakable revolvers, and know one thing for certain. The old man is still fighting. We're going to be all right. The revolvers weren't vanity. They were leadership. They were psychology. They were the visible proof that George Patton believed in his own system so completely that he was willing to stake his life on it, every single day. And time after time, that system held. But there was one more layer to his thinking, one that almost no one talks about. What happens when the weapon fails at the worst possible moment? That question haunted Patton. And his answer would shock anyone who thinks modern firearms are automatically superior. That's where we go next. Here's the brutal truth most people miss about combat firearms. The difference between life and death is often measured in fractions of a second. Not in magazine capacity. Not in muzzle velocity. Not in how many rounds you can squeeze off before the other guy does. It's measured in whether your gun goes bang when your brain screams pull. And that's exactly where George Patton drew the line. A semi-automatic pistol like the M1911 is a masterpiece of engineering. When everything is perfect, clean, lubricated, ammo seated correctly, magazines spring strong. But war is never perfect. dust from North African deserts, mud in the hedgerows of Normandy, freezing rain in the Ardennes, sweat-soaked hands, blood, adrenaline shaking your grip. Any one of those things can turn a reliable semi-automatic into a very expensive paperweight. The slide fails to return fully. The round noses down and jams. The magazine doesn't seat. The extractor slips. The recoil spring weakens from thousands of rounds. Suddenly you're standing there with a dead gun in your hand while the enemy is very much alive. Patton had seen it happen. He had lived the moment when men died because their weapon quit on them. His answer was simple and merciless: eliminate as many failure points as possible. A revolver has one moving system for firing. The trigger pulls, the cylinder rotates, the hammer falls. That's it. If a cartridge is a dud, pull the trigger again. The cylinder turns. Next round. Bang. No slide to rack. No magazine to tap. No malfunction drill to remember under stress. Just mechanical inevitability. Patton explained it plainly to his nephew, who later became a senior FBI agent. The automatic was an arm of two parts while the revolver required nothing other than loose ammunition. Two parts that must work together perfectly, or the whole thing fails. Loose ammunition? Just drop any cartridge that fits into the cylinder. Dirty. Wet. Slightly deformed? The revolver doesn't care. It chambers it anyway. He wasn't guessing. He had tested both systems in the harshest conditions men could face. And he came to a conclusion that still makes modern gun enthusiasts uncomfortable. In the worst possible moment, when your life hangs on one squeeze of the trigger, 6 rounds that fire every time beat 8 rounds that might fire 7 times. Reliability over capacity. Simplicity over sophistication. Confidence over statistics. That philosophy extended beyond the guns themselves. Patton understood that a weapon is also a message. The ivory grips weren't decoration. They were deliberate theater. Pearl-handled pistols were for gamblers, pimps, and showboats, men who carried guns to look dangerous. Ivory was for warriors. For saber hilts. For ancient kings. For men who had already proven they would kill. Every time a soldier saw those gleaming white grips, the message was unmistakable. This general isn't pretending. This man lives what he talks about. This man will end you if you force him to. And in battle, that message matters. When plans collapse, when radios go silent, when fear starts to spread, soldiers look for their leader. Patton made himself impossible to miss. The lacquered helmet. The polished boots. The riding crop slapping against his leg. The twin revolvers shining on his hips. In the smoke and chaos, one glimpse of that figure meant one thing: the fight isn't over. The old man is still in it. We keep going. German commanders knew his reputation too. They feared him more than most Allied generals. Not because of the tanks or the planes under his command, but because of the man himself. A man who refused to bend to modern convention. A man who carried weapons from another century because he believed they were better for the job he had to do. And history never proved him wrong. George S. Patton died on December 21, 1945, not in battle, but from injuries in a low-speed car accident near Mannheim, Germany. He was 60 years old. The revolvers were still on his hips when they carried him away. Did his choice of sidearm win the war? Of course not. But it shaped how thousands of men fought under him. It shaped how they remembered him. It shaped how the enemy saw him. In an age of mass-produced, interchangeable soldiers carrying mass-produced, interchangeable weapons, Patton insisted on being an individual. He insisted that the man at the sharp end should choose what keeps him alive. He insisted that personal confidence in your equipment is a weapon all by itself. And above all, he insisted that when you draw your handgun, you draw it to kill, not to threaten, not to warn, not to posture. He said it himself. The handgun should never be drawn and pointed unless it is intended to shoot to kill. No games. No second thoughts. Just finality. That mindset, more than the revolvers themselves, is what made George Patton legendary. So the next time someone tells you that semi-automatics are obviously superior in every way, remember the old cavalryman who bet his life on 6 shots from 1873, and won. He didn't choose tradition over technology. He chose certainty over convenience. And in the moments that matter most, certainty wins. If this story shifted the way you think about history's greatest decisions, and the hidden logic behind them, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. We dig into the choices that shaped legends, the calculations most people never see, the reasons that made warriors unstoppable. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Because the past isn't just stories. It's strategy. And the best strategies are the ones they don't teach in books. Thanks for watching.